one second. I need to take my phone. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. According to the best of my knowledge, the image of God is like a flawless, almighty, all-knowing, all-powerful image. And we think that this is not good for two reasons. First, it makes it very unrelatable to an ordinary human being to see themselves through the story of that God and try to be better try to be better as a human being. And second, we think that this create a certain level of like conservativeness between the church, because God, when he is the flawless image, it makes it very difficult for the church to say that, oh, we were wrong, or we want to change our mind, because these are the changes of our times and we want to adapt to those changes. Instead, the image of a flawless God makes it very difficult for the church. They always have to be consistent with what they have taught an ordinary human being, and they cannot change their opinion very easily to keep themselves up to date with what's going on or what is the norms or the opinions of an ordinary human being regarding different topics. And I will explain later in my speech. Now, what do we mean by flaw? I think flaws could look like anything that are undesirable. It could look like greed. It could look like lust. It could look like laziness. And we take the inspiration from Greek gods, in which you don't see just one image of God, but rather with a depiction of a flawed God. It is likely to be a system of gods and doctrines and stories where each individual gods represent different personalities and values, and it reflects the real world interaction between individuals with different personalities, weaknesses, and strengths. This is likely to be the case because it's balanced the universality of experience, in which individuals could see themselves through the different images of the gods. And second of all, it still balance the ambiguity of the conclusion, i.e., you don't really see one specific conclusion from the church, i.e., which is the perfect God or which is the good or bad God. You just see a system of gods, like many gods representing different values, so that there is no ultimate truth or ultimate value to pursue, but rather it can be malleable and be flexible in different times of humanity. So first, let's talk about our most important argument, which is that we believe that the image of a flawed God will promote meaningful discourse between the church and social movements such as the LGBTQ movement. Why is that the case? So because the image of God can be flawed now, we think that it creates an environment where people embrace like mistakes and welcome the culture of recognizing your mistakes and own up to it, instead of creating this culture that we're currently having now, which is the God is the all-powerful, almighty, all-knowing figure, and the church is the ultimate source of truth who interpret God teaching. The culture where flawed God create allow the church to be much more flexible with their interpretation of what is right and wrong. We believe that this is powerful because we don't think the church is an inherently evil actor where they want to reject the rights of an ordinary human being, especially people from the LGBTQ community. We can see this in the case of the most two recent popes of the Vatican Church. He like publicly embrace or at least do not reject the right of the LGBTQ community, meaning that the church has always had the incentive to be welcoming and to adapt to the changes of their times. So with the image of God, it is much easier for the church to adapt their teaching to own up to their past mistakes in saying that these people do not deserve to be living, and allow them to like welcome a much broader groups of individuals. This is good for two things. First, I think this just minimize pain and damages to people who belong to those groups that are unfortunately mistreated by the teaching of the church and of the religion. But secondly, I think it is much likely to create meaningful exchanges between these movement and the church, when the church do not insist on being the correct one and saying the truth from the Bible, but rather they're being in this environment where they feel comfortable with changing their stances, because owning up to your mistake is part of the culture of that religion. Before moving on to my point, POI, please. Three, two, one. Okay, I'll continue with my speech. Next up, we have another argument is on relatability. So we think that an almighty God is someone who is very distant from the human. He looks nothing like an average human being. So this makes the process of redeeming yourself of all the mistakes that you do seem very unrealistic and not achievable. But now with the flawed gods, I think this is more relatable and inspirational to an average human being. They see themselves in the stories of the God that they relate to. It must much more likely for them to redeem themselves and inspire them to follow all the good values that the church and the Bible and the religion is teaching them to be. So that is the second argument on relatability and how it makes people to become a better version of themselves. And lastly, on some preemption of like the other side could say that, oh, a flawed God might discourage people from being good because now God is flawed. People could take this as an excuse to not being perfect and they make mistakes all the time. We don't think that simply because the God is flawed, that the church and all the human apparatus or organization of the religion will just leave it to that way, right? Because we still have human interpretation and encouraging people to do good things. So simply because the God is flawed does not mean that these churches will allow people to just buy into bad values and become humans who do not care for others. For all of those reasons, very proud to be OG.
Thank you for the wonderful speech. Calling upon the yellow. Here.
1 minute, yeah. 잠깐만. Okay. Starting my speech. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I go to class every day wondering, why am I even taking this degree? You know, World War III feels like it's an inevitable coming. I can't afford my future, and everyone around me is so hateful towards each other. This is the current pessimistic reality that we all live in. The best way to cope and try our best to do something about it is to leave it to God's hand, because He has a plan for us. Now, two proper statements then. First, religion is used as a form to heal and to repent and seek guidance in life. Second problem statement is that in status quo, we live in a hateful society. We live in a pessimistic world. Everything is going to really bad places, and everyone around you is just so hateful. And the reason why this is true is that, look at us right now. Petrol is getting more expensive, your groceries is getting more expensive, the job market is getting more and more saturated, and you feel like the future just isn't there for you anymore. So going to a few pieces of framing then on exactly how does this image of a flawless or a perfect God look like in our world now. So it's simple. He's all-knowing. His decisions are absolute. So what does this mean is that in our world, you are disabled because you have a purpose in life. However, in God's world, God can make mistakes. So say he made you disabled, he did an accident. You are now known as God's mistake. So in God's world, then you feel more hateful towards yourself, because why were you this mistake? Why were you chosen to be like this? Why was God careless with you? So who exactly does this debate matter to? I think it's generally two main bodies. Firstly is religious people. So this could manifest in terms of religious teachings, such as in the Bible or the churches. And lastly, the general public. So going into how does this world look like in two layers in terms of individual and society. I'll go deeper into it, but in terms of an individual, you're more hopeful. And as a society, you're more tolerant and respectful. All right. Now going to first argument on how in our world exclusively we are able to create a hopeful society. So going into how exactly does this happen in the first place, right? So the people who delivers this religion or delivers this image of God is obviously your religious preachers. This looks like your church sermons, your Friday prayers. So if God wants to say that, what about the non-religious people that also exist? We tell you that your religious friends could help you. So say, for example, you tell your friend like, hey, I feel really down, like nothing is right in the world like right now. In our world, your friend will tell you, God has a plan for you, and I'm here for you, and we'll get through this together. Now, in terms of individual, the reason why this is true, that you are more hopeful now, is because you know that you live for a purpose. Like God created you carefully with intention. So whatever challenges, whatever sickness you encounter in life, you know that that is God's challenge for you. That because he knows that you are strong enough to go through it, because at the end of the day you know that God did this on purpose, because your life has a meaning. The reason why this is important is because it helps you to cope in life, because life is so stressful, because God is the healthiest way to cope. Secondly, in terms of society, the reason why this is true is because it already manifested on an individual level. So how does this look like when you see it in terms of a society? This is when we are able to tackle hate in society in forms of, say, homophobia, misogyny, or racism even. So an example then is that queer people are now seen by homophobic people as they are just made that way. You know, they have a purpose, instead of viewing them in a hateful light. Now, the impact here is simple. In our world, there exists a world where people are kinder, not just to themselves, but also to others. And I'm going to quote Bad Bunny, is that love is stronger than hate. Okay, so second argument then
Point.
no, thank you. In terms of urgency, why exactly is this urgency so important right now? I already told you an internal framing of how everything is going too bad. We need this image of a perfect God more than ever to strike this hope, to know that everything is going to be fine. The reason why this is important is because it's a way better helping coping mechanism, instead of you smoking, instead of you drinking alcohol, instead of you coping in self-harm ways. Like, say, like if Trump was able to cope better, maybe like he wouldn't done like wage wars on others, or like create a bad democracy for his people, right? Okay, now going into several responses. So OG tells us two things, right? OG tells us two things. They tell us that when God is so perfect, he becomes unrelatable. So how would people want to try to do better? We tell you that this is the same thing that you can say about superheroes that kids and adults alike has idolized and been inspired for decades. Like Superman is an alien, he can fly and can shoot lasers. In no way is he relatable to your normal human being, right? But you know what is relatable about Superman? It's being kind to others. And this is the same thing that you can still say about a flawless God. You know, you may not relate to him in terms of his like all-knowing abilities or whatever, but Jesus lived as a man, as a human, and he bonded with his humanly friends, and he helped the poor, he was kind. And um secondly, they told you that when you have this image of a perfect God, you create this sort of conservativeness within the church, and it's hard for them to change their religious teachings to fit modern society more. We tell you that the point of the debate isn't to push this image or religion onto others. It's to simply, religion is simply used as a guide for people in life. But even if we buy God, right? Even if we buy God, say that we push these teachings onto others, religious teachings follow simple rules. It's just simply like, for example, don't cheat on your wife, don't steal stuff, don't kill people. And these are literally basic morals. And um, God's framing on how a God with flaws look like. Oh, sorry, time. Brought to oppose. Thank you.
What did you not say?
Thank you, speaker, for that fine speech. Please keep in mind that anything you say after 7:15 does not get noted down and does not affect the verdict. With that, calling upon the DPM here.
Okay. Am I audible? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Okay. No. Yeah. Okay. The reason why our world is messed up right now is because we spread out the image of an almighty God. And it creates animosity towards the other, which in our world or in the Western world, they think they are the heretics. That's why things like World War III happening, like you said, all those things. It happens for a reason, and that reason is that because we spread out an image of an almighty God. Everything that the opposition said is not exclusive and is a very pinky, very decorated world, which is not true. First of all, they said about how a flawless God is actually making, I don't know, giving people hope. We believe hope isn't exclusive in their world. There are tons of other things that can give people hope, not just an almighty God. We believe that even a story about a flawed God gives people hope. Give people hope that even flawed as I am, I can ascend. I can be God, or at least I can be close to God. We believe that we can say the same to them about how a flawed God can also give people hope, not just a flawless God. Or even if they want to talk about disabled people, actually disabled people would be much more related to a flawed God because they are flawed too, you know? Flawed God, flawed God accent, flawed people accents.
Your
So actually, those things happen in both worlds. Both story can also be a good story to make people hope. The thing that gives people hope isn't the character. It's actually of how you do it, of the story, of the narrative, of who is the one that gives you that story, not the one in the story. So we believe that everything that the government and that the opposition said is not actually exclusive. It's not actually that important that we have to talk about. We believe the important thing that we need to care more about is how the system use the story, use the character to build the system upon. And we're talking about the church. We're talking about the monastery. Is a flawed God it's a better God to be used at the center of a belief system controlled by the church. That's what we are talking about. Because in that instant, we can see a difference. Because if we talk about a system built around a perfect God, an almighty, all-knowing God, we believe people will strive to find the right interpretation of what he says. People were trying to find what exactly God said. And people believe
POI.
whatever the church says because they believe God cannot be wrong. And because the priest is a messenger of God, they cannot be wrong. Yes, before that.
So
POI.
my POI is very simple. If a flawed God under your side is meant to be relatable, doesn't that collapse the entire point of divinity as something beyond human limitation? So what exactly remains God about it? Please engage.
Just like how you said about Superman. I may not think I'm as powerful as Superman, but we have something in common, which is love. Like you said, just like you said. So you don't have to have the power of God to relate to God. You relate to God because God and you believe the same thing. That's what relatability about. Anyways, so we believe that if an imperfect God is the center of a belief system, the doctrine, the Bible, the textbook is going to be much different. Much different here is that when you have to talk about when God make mistake, because mistake is something that is very subjective per se. It's very depends on the errors where you define what is a mistake, right? So it's much easier for the church to actually follow the trend, follow what change in the society to decide how should I change my textbook to better my follower, rather than how can I change the society to fit my doctrine. And that's what happened with Galileo when the church, because they're trying to protect the doctrine that they know the truth, that they know God, they are the messenger of God, they know they speak the truth. They actually make science go slower, but actually, if they think that God can make mistakes, they actually think that, oh, actually we can also make mistakes, that we understand the wrong thing, that we talk about the wrong thing, the flaw that God's make, we also make. So it's fine for us to make mistakes. It's fine for us to accept new things, accept new change in society. It's fine for us to feel okay that at some point in the history we actually hate the wrong people, just like you said, World War III, Islam versus I don't know Christian people. I'm sorry if I'm interpreting wrong. I'm not religious. Those things, right? And even we're talking about the Holy War, right? Every war that happened using the same excuses as they know the truth, because the truth is a powerful thing. Is a to control people, to make people under one flag, people actually trying to get the truth. So we believe that if a system is not built upon a premise that someone must have known the truth, it's actually better for people to actually interpret the truth or make the truth themselves, and actually accepting what they have been done wrong, accepting it and change it. And it's much more progressive system where people in power actually have don't have to care that much of their image to be the all-knowing, but actually care more about how can I change, because I don't have to keep the image of the one that cannot make any mistakes. Last of all, I want to end it with the same example as you do, talking about Superman, how he's all powerful. The thing that makes Superman that good of a character is that even with that much power, he make mistake. He kills the wrong one. He arrests the wrong people and realize that society is much more complex than a good versus evil doctrine. That's what make him relatable, a good God, and that's what make people follow him and have hope. With all of that, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for that fine speech. Calling upon the DLO. Here, here.
Hello. Okay. Um, Okay, let's finish this tournament faster. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The entire problem with OG's speech is that they never properly make out a flawed God. To what extent is he flawed? Is it just the 7 sins? Is it 21 sins? Is it an infinity of sins? Because if you just want if your only objective metric to decide what's good or bad in life is on human interpretations, then I can interpret that killing is not sinful, killing is good. Cheating is not sinful, cheating is good. And you will just reach to an inconclusive decisions and whatsoever in which, I'm sorry if this sounds far-fetched, in which there will be no any existing rules and regulations to actually govern the human life itself if there is not an if we don't put anyone on the pedestal as a reference guide to live our life. Now they say that disabled flawed people can relate to flawed God. If your flawed God is just lustful, greedy, a glutton, how does someone with an impaired arm relate to that? Unless your God is also disabled. This was a mistake on OG's end for never fleshing out the extent of their God's flaws and what and the burden that CG needs to prove. Now, first of all, a few things that we need to clarify, a few rebuttals, and why OO takes the debate. First of all, they say how they want how a flawed and preferring an image of flawed God, meaning that you can relate and etc. Again, how does relate again? Okay, let's say you can relate, and then what? Will you improve yourself? Does being relatable to a God incentivize you to improve yourself? Let's say a God say, oh, my God killed someone, so it's okay for me to kill someone also. So why should I improve myself? I think the PM preempt this on human interpretations, but how can human interpretations to keep it in check? And whose interpretation are we going to follow? Because humans themselves are different, we all have different mindsets. So which human are we going to put on the pedestal and make it as a reference point to decide whether an action is good or bad? They are only counter to actually saying that to actually ensure that the world does not fall into chaos is human interpretations. And this move on to my first rebuttal on how they think that they can promote meaningful discourse between church and social movement. Listen, a discourse will not even happen in the first place because because no church will even exist, no social movements will even exist because everyone have different interpretations. A church exists in the first place because they have a objective guide to follow, that is God. A social movement exists in the first place because they are being for example LGBTQ are being mistreated by the church who follow their who are viewed or being mistreated by the church actions who their interpretation are from a reference guide, from an objective reference, that is God, that is a perfect and flawless God. So there is no such thing as meaningful discourse if no discourse can even happen in the first place. Even if it does happen, even if, okay, let's say that we take their best case scenario that a meaningful discourse will happen between church and social movement, they will they will never reach any inconclusive or any constructive conclusion because everyone will have different human interpretations. No one will want to accept each other because then they will think that, oh, theirs is best, theirs is good, because then God is flawed, because each of them can relate to God from different perspectives. So whose perspective are we going to take? Now we are going to see that meaningful discourse are likely going to happen on our side of the house because first people will actually question what the gods write in the Bible, because they know that gods have the right answer, they just don't understand why, and then maybe someone will explain it and then now they understand. And secondly, on how they say that they have a better chance of redemption, it's still unclear on how this have a chance of redemption. I think this is on our side of the house, on how people will have better accountability, because now everyone knows that God is all knowing. God is all knowing. God is absolute. Now everyone have a guilty conscience and will abstain from wrongdoings, meaning that if they do crimes, they will actively try to sort their wrongdoings because they actively know that God is watching them. They know that God is perfect and more. Now, sorry. Moving on how, yeah. This is especially matter to people, to the vulnerable stakeholders that are people who face criminal injustice. As what my previous speaker has mentioned, the purpose that we want to prefer an image of flawless God because we want to have a united society or united society. Now, how about the people who face criminal injustice? They have hope, meaning that if the criminal justice system in Earth cannot punish the criminals, at least they can hope for a better tomorrow where they're in the afterlife. God knows the truth, and then God can provide the appropriate punishments. Now, on our side, why do we take this? Why do we take this debate? Because we prove to you how we can still be relatable while sure a trade-off that we cannot be relatable to a perfect extent of what God looks like, but at least we can be relatable at a small base where God is all knowing. That incentivizes us to actually educate ourselves so that now we can learn about God more. Secondly is how we're going to prove to you how preferring an image of flawless God can actually lead to a much more united society and a tolerant society, because now everyone will say, oh, you're born here due to a purpose. The reason there are even holy wars in the first place, or what has been mentioned by the DPM, because now they know the truth, because now they are all chasing the truth, and that's a good thing. They are chasing the truth. They are all united under one stance, and that can actually help to develop and establish rules and regulations where they can decide what is good or bad in life, because now they know that there is an objective metric to deciding it. And the impact is simple. The world won't draw into a chaotic society, and we will actively try to become an optimistic approach, which optimistic people, which is what is really needed in today's current scenario. And that's sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, for that fine speech. With this, we have come to an end of the opening half of this debate. To open up the closing half, calling upon the member of government here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so I like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate has been going down the wrong track. Both opening government and opening opposition has been prioritizing their stakeholders wrong. The main stakeholders in today's debate is not about social movement nor church. It's about the humans and the people and religious people, right? So in my speech today, I'll be saying my framing, burdens, and also extensions on opening government. So I'll start off my framing, right? So what exactly is a flawed God first? A flawed God refers to a god or a goddess with a human-like imperfection, limitations, or moral values. It's a God that actually understands that humans are imperfect and that they make mistakes. But on opposite side, they would prefer a more perfect God, and a perfect God is the kind of God that strives perfection, kindness, and punish anyone that makes a mistake, no matter small or big. Humans want a God that guides and helps you become a better person in life under any circumstances. And to clarify that, as government, we understand that having a God that's perfect in any way possible, yes, it may help you, but it will actually make it into a toxic learning instead of actual motivation. Like, it will make you have the mindset of, if you make a mistake, it equals punishment. No, when you make mistakes, you learn from it. You don't give yourself punishment just for making a mistake. So what's the burden that we have to prove, right? Government side will have to prove to you why having a flawed God helps us humans to actually improve, while opposition side have to prove and give why having a perfect God is better for us humans. What does our world actually look like? On government world, it looks like humans can worship and look up to and seek guidance from the God without having the mindset of no room for mistakes. Yes, of course, opposition side may say that it'll make people lazy, but it isn't entirely true. They want to be better. That's why they're seeking for guidance. Opposition side of the world looks like that humans are thinking making mistakes is a serious and major sin, or just making bad decision is a big sin. People can be vulnerable and make big mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they can't change and become better. So moving on to my extension, so I like to extend on room for growth, right? So why is this true? Deities in traditions often make mistakes and undergo character arcs and also learn from their mistakes, right? For example, Greek or Hindu mythology, they make mistakes and learn from it too. That's why they're being honored and looked up to right now. How does this impact the stakeholders like the humans and the people, right, that looks up to them? It makes these people that worship them learn from their mistakes too, like their own mistake. They learn that, okay, since my God has made mistake, and look at him now, I'm looking up to him because that he's a good God, and that he's like he can guide you to be better, right? So it teaches people and humans to accept that they are imperfect, but that they can still be better and improve at their own pace. They can like learn things based on their own speed and their own speed of understanding, instead of just like making everything right overnight, right? It can actually make people understand their wrongs and become better, also becoming a better person with making better decisions. So what's the comparative? Gulf side let people understand that you learn from mistakes, then improve. But opposite side will say that it makes you lazier, since your God doesn't like punish you, or your God made mistakes too. It's okay for you yourself to make mistakes. That's what opposition side looks like and what opposition sides will do. Yes, this can happen, but it's a minority, since it's human instinct to be better anyways. Why will you want to sit back and do nothing and watch other people excel before you? It's more harmful having a toxic growth environment than a minority of people being lazy. Next on my extension is the extension on the answer for the POI. Okay, so yes, it may destroy the image of a god itself in a general meaning, but at least I can actually get guidance without putting myself down, without punishing myself for making a simple mistake, right? Having a flawed god rather than a god that is perfect over anyone and everything can help human out more. It's not just about how it destroys the purpose of God. The purpose of God anyways is to help you and give you guidance in life, right? Next, I'll be moving on to my rebuttals. So open government have stated that when God is a flawless image, it makes it hard for the church. Yes, this is true, but I will say our case is better, since we actually explained like what I did just now, that it's actually bad for the stakeholders and not just the church or any social movements, right? So they also stated that image of a flawed God will lift up the church. They're fixating too much on church and tell you, and we as closing gov already, and I already told you that the stakeholders here are humans, right? Okay, so opposition side has also said that hateful you will be hateful toward yourself because you were mistaken by God. No, this teaches you to embrace your specialty, even if, yes, you're born with a disadvantage. But yes, you may be unconfident at first, but you're made special. That's why you should embrace it. Quote, this ability is your specialty. And opposite side have also stated that, okay, what if your God is lusty and greedy? That's just irrelevant. Because if they were like that in the first place, why would they be honored, and why would they be looked up to and actually like giving people guidance right now? People wouldn't just honor a god and worship a god that's like lust and greedy and had um a bad reputation for themselves in the first place. So this, for all those reasons, this is why us as closing government side wins this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, for the fine speech. Calling upon the member of opposition. Here.
Hello, I'll be handicapping myself to 5 minutes because I'm just a swing, and I know you guys want to finish this round very quickly, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If God becomes just another imperfect reflection of us, then divinity is no longer something that guides humanity upwards, right? It becomes just another excuse we use to stay exactly where we are. Because we think the government's entire framing today is built on a nice idea that doesn't really survive contact with reality, that making divinity move humans automatically makes morality more useful. But in practice, what you actually get by the end of the day is not better understanding. You get blurred standards, where the line between ideal and excuse becomes harder and harder to see. I think Gov's idea of a flawed God is very dismissive, and I will be giving a few points of responses later then. But firstly, let's look at what I will be doing in my speech. Firstly, I will be extending why government's model destroys the moral hierarchy across belief system, this is touching on all sorts of religion that believes that God is perfect. Secondly, on how I will show you why, even if the emotional benefits that Gov claims is true, they are still outweighed by the structural harm that exists under their side. And lastly, on how I will be reframing the trade-off, which is this is not about comfort versus discomfort for the people who choose to believe in this image of God, but instead it's more about like guidance versus moral drift, right? So we're talking about God not as a literal being that completely fits the behavior and the image of what Bosai is talking about. It's rather the interpretation and the image that we prefer to have like about him, right? So as it's more of a symbolic anchor across religions, a representation of like moral aspiration or like transcendence and higher than human standards. So Gov wants to replace that with an image with an interpretation of a flawed God, human-like relatability figure. We think that fundamentally changes what religion does by the end of the day. So moving on to my first extension on how this creates a collapse of moral hierarchy, right? How God stops being above humans, how this specific image or interpretation that people choose to have about God will change the fact that he is divine, will change the fact that he is someone that we should honor by the end of the day. Because let's look into two different layers. Number one, on how across religions, whether it is Abrahamic traditions or like Hindu conceptions of Dharma or like philosophical interpretations of like divine order, the divine functions as a top level reference point. As what the opening opposition has said, it becomes a guide for these people. It becomes like he becomes the role model and the guidance of people to become and true and kind and be loving to all people. It is not just important because it exists, but because it is above like critique. It is above excuses. It is above human limitation. And that's why we prefer the image of a God that is perfect. Once you introduce relatability and flaws into that level, it creates two different impacts, which is number one, how moral failure becomes normalized at the highest symbolic tier in religion. And secondly, on how people will start reasoning, oh, even divinity itself is imperfect. Even like we all believe that God is like flawed. So my imperfection is acceptable by the end of the day. This becomes harmful when someone commits a literal crime by the end of the day and say it is justifiable because their actions are forgivable, regardless of what are that their actions are forgivable, that it is no point for them to be able to justify that it is no point for them to sort out their wrongdoings because it is still accepted and forgiven by the end of the day. So this idea of like better in government side becomes optional rather than inspirational. For example then, if a judge openly admits that, oh, justice is like subjective and I also make biased calls, the legal system doesn't become more relatable, right? It becomes less authoritative. People don't feel more understood, they feel less bounded by the system, which is why if we have this specific image of a flawed God, that is exactly what happens when when you don't humanize morality, you flatten it by the end of the day. But let's move on to the second extension then on loss of aspiration across religions, right? So government assumes that people mainly need emotional comfort from religion. We think this misunderstands its second core function, which is how aspiration beyond the self. That is the whole point of religion in the first place, right? Because religious systems survive not because they're mere humans, not because they're mere the imperfections and the relatability of a human, but because they challenge them, because they don't let humans have any excuse to their wrongdoings. It lets humans to take full accountability of their actions. For example, in Christianity, moral perfection is a guiding ideal, right? Or for example, in Buddhism, where enlightenment is a state beyond human attachment. Or let's give another example, in Hindu philosophy, how Dharma represents cosmic order beyond individual desire. So in all of these cases, the divine or sacred is something higher than present human limitation. So when you put this kind of image, when you prefer this kind of image towards God, when you prefer this kind of interpretation on how you want to believe your God to be, it sort of takes away that divinity by the end of the day. So for the weighing then, firstly, we tell you that this debate is not about perfection versus imperfection or realism versus idealism. It is more of it is more of a trade-off between two functions of religion. For example, in government world, they say that it increases emotional relatability, right? They say that it reduces psychological distance, right? But we say that this is still untrue by the end of the day because it still collapses the moral hierarchy and aspiration. Whereas in our world, we say that if we still prefer the image of God where he is perfect, we maintain the transcendence of his doings. We preserve the moral standards of religion. We preserve the moral standards above human weaknesses. So a flawed God may explain who we are as a human, but only a transcendent God under opposition side tells us who we are meant to become. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Speaker, for the wonderful speech. Calling upon the government whip. Here.
Excuse me, can I have a 1 minute, please?
Yes, sure.
All right. Just checking, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A God is a role model that I myself look up to. For example, Jesus. Jesus was a human. He was not a unicorn. So in my speech, I'll be telling you why us as closing government clearly dominate this debate. Then a few layers of my speech that I'll be doing today. First is my call outs, then my rebuttals, my clashes, and lastly is my weighing. So first on my call outs, right. They said opposition stated that this perfect God is a way better coping mechanism than smoking or self-harming. We tell you on our side that it's not even close, it's not even relatively close to this motion. This motion is talking about having this flawless or flawed God. It's not talking about coping mechanism, so you're going off track. Okay, so moving on to my rebuttals then. My first rebuttal is that side opposition claims that God can make mistakes because you're disabled. We tell you on side we tell you that you're just proving why our case is better. and it's contradicting your own case. We tell you that on our side, even if we're disabled, our flawed God will still be accepting of us because it's more relatable because they're flawed themselves. They know what it's like to be disabled. That's why um being having a flawed God over a flawless God is better on our side. Next is side opposition states that we're able to create a more hopeful society. But my question to you now is, how do you have a more hopeful society if everyone is trying to be like their perfect or flawless God? But it's not possible because no one is perfect, including our flawed God on our flawed God on our side. Because we tell you that humans make mistakes. It's a normal thing in humanity. We tell you that it's not possible to be a perfect human, quote unquote, because if side opposition wants to have a hope of create a more hopeful society, it means that they want the people worshiping these gods to chase after these gods as a role model, and they want to be like this flawless god, and it's not possible because, like I said, no one is perfect. Next is that they stated that God created you for a purpose if you have a meaning in life. But said opposition literally said, when God makes you disabled, then you hate yourself. So what are you trying to say here? You're contradicting your own case, and it's very clear why we win this debate.
POI?
Next, sorry, POI rejected. Next, moving on to my clashes. My first clash is on specialty versus hating yourself. So on side government, we teach you that it is okay to embrace your specialty, even if yes, you're born with a disadvantage or disability. If yes, you may be like not confident at first, but you're made special. That's why you embrace it. That's why you learn to love yourself slowly. If your God is flawed, you can relate to the God, and it all boils down to the relatability at the end of the day, like as my member of government has stated over and over again. Meanwhile, on side opposition, they're making it seem like we will hate on ourselves when God was the one that made us disabled. No, we win this clash because my member of government has stated just now, you will learn to embrace it over time. It makes you stand out. Moving on to my next clash, flawed God versus a perfect God. A perfect God. We win this clash because us on side government, uh, we show you that a flawed God is a God that accepts you for who you are, and it's better on our side because the human, which is our main stakeholders, like I've stated, or my member of government has stated, are not being punished for making a mistake or sinning. I mean, no one's perfect, so a perfect God will raise the thought to be the same level of perfectionism as the God. Meanwhile, on side opposition, they kept talking about perfect God and why it's good. Sure, their case is solid, but they've never even stated why the flawed God on our side is so bad. Even though our God is flawed, it doesn't matter because we tell you a flawed God is more relatable than a perfect God. It's like what side opposition has stated, Superman versus a human. It's proving our point because these humans, if you compare yourself to a perfect God, obviously it's not going to match up because you're a human, they're a perfect God. It doesn't tie back together because, like I've stated over and over again, we as humans make mistakes. So lastly, on my weighing, that we us
Yeah.
on side government, sorry, rejected. Us on side government say that God will accept you no matter what. Meanwhile, on side opposition, they state that gods can make mistakes because you're disabled. We win this debate by relevance and truth. So why do we win? We on side closing government tell you that we win because over flawed God, because even if a flawed God is normalized, it's okay if we make mistakes because our God still makes mistakes with us because they're flawed, right? And worst case scenario, maybe the humans are on our side. That's a crime, like closing opposition stated. It's still okay for it's still okay because, for example, Christians, they have confessions. They go to confess their sins to the priest, and it helps these quote unquote sinners or people that does these types of crimes to fix and change themselves for the better, because our God still has teachings and moral values that they've taught us in our religion, right? But on side opposition, if you really if you're stuck on this mindset that just because you're disabled, your God can make mistakes. No, you're running on pure dreams, because on our side, either you're good or bad, our God still makes mistakes like a human, as we stated over and over and over again. It teaches other people that it's okay to make mistakes. So if you want to walk on rainbows and dream all day that a perfect God is better than a flawed God, then stand side opposition. But if you believe that a flawed God, fellow human like yourself, is more relatable, stand side government. Never been prouder to propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for the wonderful speech, calling upon the opposition whip to conclude the debate. Op whip.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll handicap myself again. I'm very sorry if my speech sounds a bit offensive. It is just a debate. I'm very, very sorry. Good luck for all the teams in this room who will be breaking. So 3, 2, 1. At the end of this debate, government is trying to make God easier to live with. But I say, right, in doing so, they make morality much harder to live by. So my job as a whip is very simple, right? I will show you why. Number one, opposition wins on few keys of clashes that have happened in the debate, a few points of responses for both teams of government side, and I'll be moving on to my wing and proving to you why exactly government's world collapses under its own relatability argument. But let's look at the few points of responses, right? Number one, on why government's case still does not stand by the end of the day. So here's my response to OG, right? So they say that the reason why they prefer this image of a flawed God is because they want to prioritize the mental health of religious people. So government claims a flawed God improves mental health because it feels more relatable. But this is a comfort over structure, kind of trade-off coming from their speech, right? Because and it is not as clean as they make it sound. So sure, let's accept that relatability may reduce emotional distance, even if relatability makes you feel more connected to this flawed God. But it also removes the aspirational pressure that helps people regulate behavior and meaning making, right? So if God is just as flawed as humans, then religious guilt or accountability and moral striving lose their weight. All of this, religious practice that you've mentioned under your side, for example, the example that you use, which is the confession for Christianity, still fall under your side, right? Because the whole point of having an image of a perfect God is because that this perfect God is an eternal being that is perfect, an eternal being that holds you full accountability on your behaviors, on your actions. So mental comfort built on lower standards is not stability coming from government side. It is emotional flattening, right? But moving on to my next response then, right, on how relatable teachings or subjective interpretation is actually harmful. The problem is there's too much subjectivity in status quo that dissolve the shared meaning, as what the opening opposition has mentioned. Because religion is not only personal, right? It is also a collective moral language. It is you literally have a group of religious people. If everyone is free to interpret divinities like flaws differently, then moral teachings will lose the consistency. They will immediately lose this sort of practice that has been going on for centuries. The words in the Quran will lose their meanings. This religious authority becomes fragmented and belief becomes purely individual preference. So what both teams of government calls freedom, we call loss of coherence, because a system where everything is valid stops being guiding, because it becomes just expressive. It becomes just someone that needs something beside them to help them guide, instead of something that they commit their life into, instead of something that they fully put themselves accountable to. So then, right, let's move on to clashes, on extensions for clashes, right? So why does opposition win on the clash of moral hierarchy, right? So we've already told you that in government's side, moral hierarchy collapses in government's world, because opposition's strongest extension is simple. Because religion functions because it creates a clear hierarchy of moral aspiration, right? So that's why this image of a perfect God is something above human limitation. We've already characterized this to you in framing. It defines an image of a person who is perfect. It defines an image of a person who is kind and loving and everything. So if you prefer an image of a flawed God, this means that there's only human level divinity. It defines normal. So once you flatten that hierarchy, it brings the harms of like how moral ambition will drop in like, this religion, on how like these religious, quote unquote religious people will like give more excuses to their actions, and how like ethical standards become negotiable, which is why it's bad, right? So government never solves this. Both teams never even engage this to begin with, because all they've been saying is that they only accept it as a trade-off, but never prove why exactly it is good. They never impact it to you why exactly that, because their actions become justifiable, even if like they did something extremely bad that harms a lot of people, it is still better by the end of the day. They never engage with that analysis to begin with. Moving on to my second extension, which is like on the clash of guidance versus reflection. So opposition proves a key distinction that government ignores in both teams, right? So government gives you a God who reflects humanity. In our side, we give you a God who directs humanity. That is the purpose of a perfect God, right? So reflection in government's side tells you what you already are, but direction that we are trying to push here tells you what you should become by the end of the day. That is why this image of a perfect God has been going on for centuries. It has been taught in religious classes. It has been taught in religious schools. It has been written in Qurans. It has been written in Bibles. It has been a teaching that has been going on for centuries. So if you have this distinction of a flawed God, it removes the whole point of religion as a whole. So moving on to my weighing then. This debate is not about whether flawed God feels nicer. It's not about whether or not flawed God feels more comfortable to you. It is about what religion fundamentally becomes. Because in government world, they keep pushing on this whole idea of relatability, flexibility, or like emotionally immediate. But this, again, as I said, weakens moral hierarchy. It fragments the interpretation of what a god should be. It reduces the aspirational force for these people to stay kind, to hold themselves accountable by the end of the day. So here's the key way. Relatability is a short-term comfort, right? So moral hierarchy is a long-term societal structure. So a system that feels better, that government is trying to push here, but guides worse, is not a progress in religion itself. It's not a progress that brings to the individual themselves. It is a decline with like good marketing, right? So if you want to believe if you believe that having an image of a perfect God helps you to hold yourself accountable, which is like the pure definition of divinity, the pure definition of eternal being, then side with team opposition. CO wins this debate. Here.
Thank you for the wonderful speech. With this, we have come to an end of this debate. I'll be back with the OA as soon as I'm done filling the ballot.